Ottawa in Ontario in Canada. And I had the great pleasure of meeting his wife at lunchtime today, and a lovely little boy who was running about, not terrifying his mother, but I was marveling at her patience with a little 2-year-old, he's not 2, how old is he? He's 2.5. 1.5, yes. He looked rather muscular, you know, I think, yes. Be like his father, a karate expert, do you think, at some stage? But anyway, it's a 14-hour trip for a mother with a 1.5-year-old. I know nothing of that, but you will. Yeah, you know what that is. Anyway, it was absolutely lovely to meet them. And I was looking again at the subject that John Henry Westen is going to speak about, faith in action. And I was going to mention this to him this morning, but I didn't get round to it. On the 16th of March, an appropriate day, because the following day is a big day for persons of Irish extraction. Anyway, I happened to be watching a television program off the internet, of a channel which is RT, which is Russia Today, it stands for RT, and I find it quite enjoyable. If you get a chance to look at it, RT. And the faith in action was precisely what I saw John Henry Westen demonstrating on that international television news channel with 3 other persons. And you will know what a split screen is. It's where you get in television, you get 1 or more images of a human being. In this case, there were 4 in the screen. The host for the program, as you look at the screen top right, 2 women on the left, and John Henry Westen in the bottom of the quartet. And they were talking about the Catholic Church. The 2 women had a background that I didn't become familiar with. Obviously, the presenter had his own particular point of view. I'm not sure that he had an electric prod or a goad, but it seemed to be, he was doing that orally. But one of the 2 women seemed to have been in a religious order or in a religious life at some stage, and her particular barrow was a married clergy and sundry other propositions that didn't seem to be in the front of the present Pope's mind. And the person who appeared on the screen below her, I think, may well have, from the remarks she made, have been a Catholic at some stage, but had decided that it probably wasn't for her, and she was something else. But she still had extremely firm views about the Catholic Church and how it should organize itself and how it should be run. And there was one solitary soul who was speaking on behalf of Orthodox Catholicism on the bottom right of the screen, and he championed our views. And I thought, good on that man, well done. And I still say that. He was absolutely marvelous, and he was almost unbearably polite. He achieved a great deal more, and his charity kind of came through, and I thought, a man of remarkable restraint. It wasn't 3 against 1, but it was certainly 2 against 1, and they were both formidable women. I think one was a Brit, one was from the United Kingdom, I think. That was the one who wanted a female pope, was it, or something like that? Anyway, yes. I thought to myself, that'll take a while, and yet I haven't spoken to Francis I about his resignation, but if I do, I will let you know. Yes, and the person below, well, very strong views about how the Catholic Church should operate and why it wasn't functioning properly. But anyway, we had a champion on the screen on this international program, Russia Today, and that man was John Henry Westen, and he's here, and I want to hear what he has to say.
It is a great joy for me to be with you today. Hasn't this been awesome so far? I mean, you come and you expect, okay, what are we going to expect? And you get here and you have a mass opening with the bishop celebrating, who most of you probably know is the son of a great pro-life activist. And then you have Colleen Bayer address us, this great example of a pro-life leader who herself has adopted 3 children after having one of her own as well, and tells us of the horror of just the death toll in terms of abortion all around the world, and yet the great hope she still has. And then we're melted today with the Sisters of Life who come, and really what it demonstrated to me so powerfully this morning was these women are able to reveal their close, loving relationship with Christ. While Sister Bethany was speaking this morning, I looked over at the open heart of Jesus, pierced with a lance, and I said, yes, he let his love be known. And here are these beautiful women telling us of their own loving relationship with Christ. It's an amazing love story which was brought out so powerfully and so forcefully. Really, what does that do for us? It brings us to, hey, I want that relationship. And it's harder for men to express, but the women do it so beautifully. And yet, as men, we realize, oh my gosh, we're called, as all of our sisters are, to that self-same relationship with Jesus, that one-on-one intimate union with Christ. So I've been so blessed to be here already. And it is a great honor and privilege for me to be here because, you know, I was on the other side. I wasn't where you guys are sitting. I was on the other side. I was raised to be where you guys are sitting. My dad was a very holy Catholic. In fact, he was a daily mass, daily rosary kind of Catholic. He stayed single till he was in his 40s because he thought he was called to be a priest, but then heard audibly he was called to marry, and so then he consented to marry. Thanks be to God, because I wouldn't be here. But he was an amazing Catholic also in my own upbringing. I remember when I was 8 years old, he would tell me, I would rather see you drop dead now than fall into a life of sin. That means when you're 8 years old, you're thinking, what does that mean? As you get older, you realize, oh my gosh. But he was serious. He was a very loving father. He doted on us because, well, we were living in Toronto, which is a city, it's a huge city. Our population is almost the population of New Zealand. And that's where I grew up. It's very city life. It's very hard life in terms of the faith. It's not hard in terms of economic success because there's everything there, but in terms of the faith, it's a very hard life. Because everywhere you go, there's every stimulation for everything but the faith. There's massive posters showing you all sorts of filth to drag your mind into the gutter. There are availability of every kind of drug and thing you could imagine to drag you away from your relationship with Jesus, but there we were. And my dad would pray with us every night, pray the rosary. I remember when I was probably 9 or 10 years old, doing a cartwheel after saying the rosary because I felt we were in such close relationship with Jesus, it was awesome. I knew we were going to go to heaven, and it was amazing. When I was about 11 years old, maybe 12, my friend, who was a year and a half older than me, really cool, he looked like the Fonz. If anybody remembers Happy Days, or maybe it's only an American program, but he had lots of girlfriends all the time, and everybody thought he was cool, and this was a Portuguese friend of mine, and he looked like the Fonz. He had that wavy hair thing going. And so he was like my hero. And one day, we were together, and he said to me, you know, I swear to God, blah, 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 blah. And I knew he was lying. And I sort of freaked out. In fact, I stepped back from him thinking the lightning's going to come down, and I don't want to be near that scene. And I sort of told him, I said, hey, you said, I swear to God, and you were lying. Look, I know you were lying. And remember, I'm like 10 or 12 years old, somewhere around there. And he said, I don't effing care about the blah, blah. And he used so many swear words that I'd never heard before. And I was like, oh my Lord, what am I going to do now? And I had a decision to make right there. I had a big decision to make. I had a decision to make whether to go with my friend, to be cool in the eyes of the world, and to leave my Lord, or to stand up for my faith, the faith that I had received from my father. And I didn't choose the right path. It wasn't soon after that we were in a alleyway on our street in Toronto. And again, we're in our either late 12-year-old or early teen. And we found a stack of pornography this high. And we took it and we hid it somewhere into one of those spots where you go as boys, you go and We left it there and went back to it and back to it. And that started my life's downward spiral. Because soon enough I became addicted to pornography. Soon enough, when my dad was insisting I would go to Mass, I would go to church. I would grab a bulletin from the church before I went to play pool with my friends, and then bring it back home and say, "Here, Dad, here's the bulletin, see you later." I started noticing strange things. I've been wearing a scapular probably since I was 3, probably before that, because my dad was that way. And I noticed that when I was looking at pornography or going to or something like that, all of a sudden, I'd go, "Oh, what is that itchy thing? Oh, it's my scapular." You know, it's funny because I've been wearing it since I was 3. I never felt the scapular before in my life. It's there. It's part of my clothes all the time. Although when I went to do something sinful, oh my gosh, it's that thing. And so eventually, guess what? I took it off. Surprise, surprise. When I was 14 years old, my dad gave me a book called True Devotion to Mary. True Devotion to Mary is one of the most important books in the church next to the Bible. You have the Bible, you have the Catechism, and then you actually have True Devotion to Mary. Does that sound weird? How many of you have heard of True Devotion to Mary? Okay, that's not every hand. Every hand has to be up for that question, because True Devotion to Mary said Pope John Paul II, who, by the way, his motto, Totus Tuus, was taken from St. Louis de Montfort. He said of that devotion, this devotion, by the way, this is a direct quote, is indispensable to anyone who wants to give themselves to the work of Christ and redemption. Guess what that means? It's indispensable, period. Indispensable means you can't do without this. And so I had that book on my bookshelf from the time I was 14. I read the first page and I went, nah. And I left it on my bookshelf. Eventually, though, I got girlfriends and all sorts of nasty things and wasn't living a life worthy of the name Catholic. And that book on my bookshelf was bugging me because it was where I slept. And I would get up in the morning, I would see Our Lady's face on the front and True Devotion on the side. You know, so I threw it away. I used to go clubbing in Toronto. Thank God I didn't get into drinking or drugs, but I loved dancing. I would go to dance clubs and spend the night dancing. I would come home at 2 and 3 in the morning, and I would see my dad. Remember, he was in his 40s when he got married, so he was an older man already when I'm in my mid-teens, and I had fake ID so I could get into the clubs, of course. And there I am dancing till 2, 3 a.m., come home, and there's my dad still kneeling by his bedside praying. And my response wasn't, "Oh, wow, he must really be committed." It was, "What a silly old man." Oh, for crying out loud. Sometimes when I came home at 2 or 3 in the morning, he was still kneeling by his bedside, but he had fallen asleep, so he's sort of like this on the bed. And it was a joke to me. It was retarded. You know, it wasn't only me picking on him. I had 2 siblings. I had a younger brother and a much younger sister, and my brother, too, in his turn, who did get into drinking and drugs. He, too, was like, "Oh, man, the guy's always with his head in the clouds." But it wasn't only us, it was our mom, too. You see, my mom was a Catholic, but she wanted a normal Catholicism. She wanted a Sunday-only type of Catholicism. Maybe, you know, Christmas and Easter for sure. But what is wrong with just Sundays? What is this daily Mass thing? What is this rosary every night thing? What for? Don't you know you're an extremist? It wasn't only his wife and his kids, it was actually his own family too. His mother and his sister. You see, he was a visa officer for Canada at one point in his life, which means he brought people into the country. Sometimes those people would be poor, and so he would bring them in and let them sleep in his house. And his mother said, "Oh, you're crazy. You don't know what you're doing." Sometimes he'd give them his furniture as they left so they could have something to start with, and that just drove his whole family nuts. He worked later for the Catholic Children's Aid in Canada, and because he would mention the faith as part of the Catholic Children's Aid and caring for the people who he was with in social work, his workers made fun of him and called him a crazy extremist as well. But that was my dad. And yet I was living a life so far from the faith that when I got to university level, I kept clubbing, of course, and I was going absolutely crazy. I had more than one girlfriend at the same time, so your life becomes a living lie. You have to lie to do this, or to do that, and to do that. When I met another girl at university, she was older than me, and I knew she would likely not go out with me if I was younger. So guess what? I showed her that fake ID I had to get into the clubs. That put me at a year and a half older than her, and that was just grand. And that was a girl I really liked. So on goes life, and I'm driving. Oh, by the way, at university I got involved with the Chinese mafia. Started stealing things. And I was driving like a demon because everything was cool, and that was cool to do. And so I was driving, and in 1 year, I got 18 infractions with parking tickets, speeding tickets, car accidents. I had like 3 or 4 car accidents at the time. And it was insanity. But one of the things that happened was when I got caught driving, I was speeding, so I lost some points. Then I got caught speeding again, and I lost some more points. Then I got caught speeding a 3rd time, and I lost my license. But of course, when you're a perpetual liar, that doesn't matter to you at all because you keep going, it doesn't matter. And so I did. I kept driving without a license now. And I got, lo and behold, caught speeding again. But when you're a perpetual liar, there's no problems in your life, right? So I said, I'm my friend. I was smart enough to know his birthday, his home address. And I said, oh, officer, I forgot my license. My name is Walter Ferreira, and I live at such and such. And the only problem was when my friend Walter got the ticket, he said, yeah, it wasn't me. Sorry, I don't drive that car. And here is where I was on that day. Of course, the police have these awesome methods of research, so they were able to track down the car to me. And came to my home and knocked on the door and got my dad at the door. And they said, we need to talk to John Henry Westen. And my dad, Henry Westen, said, what's this about? We need to talk to him, sir, right away. So, me and my blissful life upstairs doing whatever I was doing, gets called downstairs, there's the police here to see you. And all of a sudden, I had that sinking feeling. That crazy sinking feeling, which I was never far from. You remember, my whole life was a lie. One girlfriend would find out some little hint of something, and that sinking feeling was there. So I was always on the verge of that sinking feeling anyway. Your life, when you're living a life of sin, might look all fine and dandy from the outside. My male friends were probably looking and saying, hey, that guy's got girlfriends, not girlfriend. And he's cool, he's into porn, he's got a car, he's racing around. So it might have looked all sorts of grandiose from the outside, but from the inside, it's hell. And so when I heard the police were downstairs, I didn't even know what they were there for. Because I was doing so many bad things, it could have been a number of things. And there they were with the fraud. Oh my gosh, what do you mean fraud? Yeah, it's a criminal offense. Oh, by the way, you're not staying home now, you're coming with us. Oh, you're coming with us where? Oh, coming with us to jail. I was shattered. I thought, this is insanity. He's finally caught up with me. Oh crap, now what do I do? I remember I went to the holding cell, and literally I didn't know what to do, so I stood on my head. It was nutso, because I thought my life is upside down. And it truly was. You know, my girlfriend was holding my bail papers for me to get back to the court. And my lawyer somehow showed up late, and we were late, and my girlfriend had ripped up my bail papers. At that point in my life, I realized one thing. Okay, I'm going to lose my freedom. I have a nice university career going. I don't pay much attention to it, but it's going well. I've been gifted, so I'm able to do well in school, and I've been gambling, so I've been able to pay for things. And my whole life is going here. The only girl that I actually care about is just torn up my bail papers, and she looks like she's leaving. I'm losing my education and my freedom. This sucks, is what I said back then. And that's when I knew I had to turn around. That's when, you notice how God does that? Oftentimes, you can't get there when you're riding high on the hog of life. You have everything you need, everything's good. But when things hit and when you're in need, that's when we turn to our Lord. And that's what I did. I turned to our Lord and tried to pray. So I prayed the Our Father. And it was hard. I somehow miraculously got out of that scrape with jail with just basically a warning, and went home and decided to try and live this life my dad was talking about all the time. But it was tough. Because you know what? I was still addicted to porn. I said, I'm not going to do that anymore. And the next day I'd be walking to the video store, asking myself as I'm walking, what are you doing? Oh, I don't have any control. That's what I'm doing. Because it has control over me. You see, when Jesus tells us that he wants to come to us to give us life and to give it to us abundantly, many people out there in the world think, oh, you're going to be all sorts of restricted with Jesus. And it's exactly the opposite. You're all sorts of restricted when you're into sin because you can become a slave to sin. And Jesus gives you freedom. And so I couldn't get it right. So I finally turned to that book that my dad had put on my shelf, that many years ago, True Devotion to Mary by St. Louis de Montfort. And in fact, it's a tiny little book. It's only about 100 pages long. It's the church's greatest treatise on Mary. The church has volumes on Mary that are this thick, written by the greatest saints. Yet it says the most important one is this tiny book of about 100 pages. For me, that was great because I had spent most of the years when I should be studying and learning about the faith off watching porn on TV. And so I needed to catch up, and I needed this way of doing it. So I read this 100-page book, and then I said, uh-oh. I realized this does not mean an hour on Sundays. It doesn't. This means all day, every day, giving your life to Jesus Christ through his Holy Mother Mary. Every thought, every word, every deed, everything you do. And then I had a big, big problem. You see, I was ready to do Sunday mornings. 1 hour Sundays, that's not too much to ask. But this thing was your whole life, and I was thinking, well, I'd even do it if it was real, and that's the big problem. Is it real? See, over the last 7, 8 years, I had been telling myself God isn't real. Because when your conscience bugs you, you got to get rid of it somehow. So I told myself, God isn't real. Over and over again. If someone could prove it to me, oh yeah, I'd believe, and I'd be like my dad, but it's not. And so I had nothing to do but go ask my dad. It was the only thing I knew left in life anymore was that Dad loved me. Because my whole life was absolutely upside down. So I put the True Devotion book under my arm, and I went to talk to him. I had a whole little speech prepared for him. Dad, I only know one thing in life anymore, and that's that you love me. I read your book, and it means giving up my whole life, and I'm ready to do that, but only if it's real. Can you please tell me, is this real? I could never ask my dad that question. I got up to Dad, and I looked at him, and his whole life smacked me in the face harder than anything he could ever have said. I saw in him all the persecutions he received for being an extremist, daily Mass, daily Rosary Catholic. I remembered when he was having a haircut by my aunt, he was praying silently to himself, and she caught him and she smacked him and said, "What are you doing?" I remembered walking by him at 2 a.m. in the morning while he was kneeling there saying, "What a silly old man." I remembered when I was on the phone at 2 a.m. in the morning in downtown Toronto and I heard a noise in the backyard and I grabbed the bar from my dumbbell and went outside to clobber whoever it was, and there was my dad kneeling in front of a statue of Our Lady. That persecution he suffered for the truth of the faith gave me the answer that no word anybody could have said would have given me. The example of your lived out faith, especially the persecutions you suffer for this faith, speak louder than any words you can ever say. What did St. Francis say? St. Francis, for whom the Pope took his name. He said, "Go and preach to the whole world, day and night, and if you have to, use words." Because it's the example of your lives that will change hearts. From that day, I practiced true devotion, and I was given a miraculous healing from my pornography addiction. I was given so many blessings in my life that they can't even be recounted. I went from someone totally on the other side to someone committed to Christ through his Holy Mother and was blessed for it in unbelievable ways. That girl who held my bail papers became my wife. I, who probably was, encouraging people in contraception and abortion, and I didn't give a care, am now blessed with 8 beautiful children. The journey of faith takes you to different places in different ways. I finished my master's program at the University of York in Toronto, and I got a scholarship to do an MA. I did the MA in an extended version and was 2 years away from a PhD and had a full scholarship to do that as well. When I felt called to leave the program, it was very strange because I had a $16,000 scholarship and, as I said, 2 years away from the PhD, and I was only 23 years old. I had just married, and we had moved out of Toronto to raise our children in the country of Canada so that we'd be away from the city and all of its horrors. We call ourselves refugees from Sodom and Gomorrah, living where we do. And I told my wife at the time, who was actually at the time a Protestant, and I'll tell you about that tomorrow, but I told my wife at the time, don't worry, St. Joseph will find me some work. I had worked already for a year at this point, volunteering for homeschooling families who wanted to have their kids taught in kind of a private school thing. They didn't have any money for it, but I felt I owed something back to society, and by the way, they told me I could teach religion from the catechism and history from a Catholic history book to an all-Protestant school. So I knew that was God. And so I did that. A year later, of course, our student loans came due, which means we owed lots of money. My wife, who was a teacher, went to work as a teacher, and I kept telling her, don't worry, St. Joseph is going to find me something to do. I remember being at a daily mass one summer in a town where my in-laws have their cottage, and we were there, and I went to daily mass. It was like a Tuesday or something, and after mass was saying a thanksgiving after receiving our Lord in the Blessed Sacrament. His presence is with us after we receive him for 15 minutes at least, so I was there saying the thanksgiving. Usually when I finished that, and you can only do that when you don't have children yet, by the way, you look up and the whole church is evacuated, and likely the priest has already locked the door and you have to find a way out. But this particular time, there was a woman in my aisle who had a head covering on, so I wondered what that was all about. And as we were leaving, the priest said to us, oh, are you two together? And we said, no. And so he introduced us to one another and then excused himself. And we were sort of left there. You know when you're left there with somebody, you kind of want to make small talk. So you say, hi, how are you? And she said to me, shh. We shouldn't talk here. We're in front of the Blessed Sacrament. And she proceeded outside the church. And I was proceeding after her outside the church, and I turned around to Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament, and I said, aha, she's one of yours, eh? And out of the church I went. And as I met her on the steps of the church, she said to me, I kid you not, do you have a job? I had never met this person in my life before. I had not told anybody what I was doing. I didn't even write it down on one of those little pieces of paper and put it under the statue so she could have maybe read it or something. Nothing. Yet she tells me the first thing she says is, do you have a job? And I said, no. She said, good, I have a job for you. And at that point I knew whatever she says is God telling me what to do. So she said, the interim newspaper, the pro-life newspaper of Canada, needs people to sell the paper. And I said, okay. So she gave me some contact information, and I raced back to the cottage where my wife was staying with her parents. And I said, I told you St. Joseph would get me a job. And I said about the interim newspaper, Canada's pro-life newspaper, needs people to sell the paper, and that's what I'm going to do. And her response was something like, do you mean to tell me you gave up 7 years of post-secondary education and turned down your PhD scholarship so you could become a paper boy? Her father was similarly unimpressed, but I was undaunted. In the next 3 weeks, I sold 3 subscriptions to the paper, one to my dad, one to the local church, one to somebody else. and went down 3 hours to Toronto for the interview. And there at the interview, I learned that they didn't only want me to sell the paper, they wanted me to sell ads in the paper. So I said, great. And I was leaving to go back the 3 hours home. They said to me, do you want to meet Jim Hughes? And I said, oh, sure. Jim Hughes is the head of the pro-life movement in Canada. He's the guy on TV all the time. They love to have him on TV because he's a big white guy with white hair. So they love that image. But anyway, Jim's a great guy. And I went up to him, and I was going up to him. He did not look friendly at all. I'm walking up to him, and he has got this horrible grimace on his face, and he's looking at some papers. And so I get to him, and I'm right in front of him, and he throws the papers down on the desk, and he says, what the heck is this? Except he doesn't say heck. He says that other H word that ends in 2 hockey sticks. And I looked at it, and it's my resume, and so I said, it's my resume. And he picks it up, and he leafs through it again, and he says, are you for real? I just met this guy. And he's saying, what the heck is this? And are you for real? And he's going through it. He says, were you a researcher at the University of Toronto, University of Ottawa, and the University of Florence in Italy? And I said, yes. He said, you had a PhD scholarship? And I said, yes. He said, you turned down the PhD? I said, yes. And he was angry. He was unfriendly. And so eventually in the conversation, I said to him, you know what? You know my dad. My dad is Henry Westen. And yes, I don't look at all like him because he's a white guy with blue eyes. That's because my mother's Indian and I'm a mix, and therefore I'm John Henry Westen and he's Henry Westen. And he's a supporter of yours, actually. And all of a sudden, Jim's demeanor changed completely. He took me back to his office and he said, look, you can work for us, you cannot sell the paper for us. So he put me on research, and that was a great thing because research was, for me, what I had been doing all these years before. And the research projects that he had me doing, I sent off by email, was just starting, it was 1995. I sent off to my few friends and to Jim. Jim was the vice president of International Right to Life, and so he'd share some of these reports with the international leaders of the pro-life movement. That was actually the birth of LifeSite News. These little crazy reports that I was sending in from Bancroft, Ontario at the time, and they became very regular. In 1997, Steve Jelcevac was asked to start a website for the pro-life movement in Canada, and so he built this website, and on it we put this little, by that time, little news thing I was doing every day. And lo and behold, the news thing became more and more important on the website, so much so that all the other stuff on the website wasn't paid much attention to. So the pro-life group there said, we need our own website. That's the news site for everybody. Those were the beginnings of LifeSite News, which today is something very miraculous. I have no idea how this kind of crazy, small, seeming nonsense has turned into what it is now. Right now, LifeSiteNews.com is a resource for the whole wide world's pro-life movement. Last month, we had 3.3 million page views. We're known by every single leader in the pro-life movement throughout the world. And we have journalists in the United States, in Australia, in Italy and Rome, in Canada, of course, in France, in Mexico, and soon to be in Russia. We're launching a Spanish language site right now, and things are moving crazily. And what is this? This is nothing but simply answering to God's call in faith. Crazy little calls in faith. But He is so faithful. He is so good, even to the worst of sinners. Remember my background of railing against Christ, of railing against His body, of abusing His body. Because remember, of course, when we abuse ourselves or women by looking at pornography, we're abusing Christ. What did Christ say in the Gospels? He said how we're going to be judged. When I was hungry, you didn't feed me. When I was thirsty, you didn't give me a drink. When I was sick, you didn't visit me. What? When did we see you hungry, or you thirsty, or you sick and didn't minister to you? Because you didn't do it to the least of these, you didn't do it to me. Depart from me into everlasting fire. And then to the good, he says, when I was thirsty, you gave me a drink. Hungry, you fed me, and so on. And the good say to him, when did we see you hungry? When did we see you thirsty? Because you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. That's what we're doing with pornography. That's what we're doing with masturbation. That's what we're doing with abortion. When I was an unborn child in my mother's womb, did you do anything to save me? The whole question of life played a big part in our faith life as well. You see, after I left the PhD program, I had my classmates tell me, oh my gosh, what are you doing? But the oh my gosh, what are you doing got a whole lot worse when we started having children. Everybody's fine when you have one children and then two sometimes. But when you have your third child, people look at you and go, what happened to you? You had the perfect family. You had a girl first, then a boy. That's it. Oh, that was an accident. We'll forgive you the one. But then when we have your fourth child, they go, okay, something's really wrong with you. I remember the famous line is always, don't you know what causes that? And my favorite response is, yes, and from now on we're keeping our toothbrushes in separate glasses. When we had our fifth child and our sixth child, people started to really wonder, and our parents were reacting too. Not my dad, of course, but my wife's parents and my other family members. And it was a hard thing, except we had swallowed this truth. If you're going to give all over to Christ, give all. And why not also your fertility? Because God is not going to curse you with 100 million children. It's God who opens the womb and God who provides. You know, when I was having these many children, the idea was from my colleagues and from my friends, you know, you're doing something very careless and stupid. You are relegating yourself to dire poverty and your children to being stuck in the middle of nowhere, always and forever in poverty, and you're subjecting them to that. Are you comfortable with that? And you know, some amazing things happened. One amazing thing that happened, and because God is so faithful, He is so very generous to us. One of the things that happened is when we had 5 children, and my wife was pregnant with our 6th, we got a call from an aunt of mine. And she said, I'd like you and your whole family to come to Germany. And I almost laughed out loud on the phone, but I didn't want to be rude. So I said, oh, I'm sorry, we'd love to come. We could never afford it. That's okay, but it was a nice thought anyway. And she said, no, you don't understand. I've inherited a house here in Germany, and I want you all to come over and stay in the house, and you can use my car. And then when you leave, I'm going to sell my house and pay for your trip. And so we went to Germany. God's generosity is completely and utterly overwhelming. If you give yourself to Him, He gives Himself to you over and over and over again in the most generous, awesome ways. He sits in the Blessed Sacrament day after day, night after night, begging for your visit. And who is this? This is the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. We're all impressed when we can get a politician to talk to us. Gosh, if you had an opportunity to meet the Prime Minister, how many here would go? The Prime Minister would like to see you in his office, private audience just for you. How many of you here would actually go? Even if you had to drive for a long time or get up early in the morning, I think you would. Yet the King of all the Prime Ministers sits there waiting for us. I'm gonna conclude with a little story of what happened to us in Germany. So we're in Germany, and on the plane already, people started calling us the crazy family because we had 5 kids, and my wife was already very visibly pregnant. And there we are in Germany, and went to this beautiful place called Aachen. Aachen is a place in Germany where actually Constantine was there, and he divided up in this church in Aachen the Holy Roman Empire between his sons and so on, and his throne was there. And so we're at this church, and remember Constantine's mom is St. Helen, and she found the true cross. And when they found the true cross, she got all sorts of gifts from the Vatican, from the Pope, because she found the true cross. They knew it was the true cross by that miracle of the cure of somebody. And so she got all these really neat relics. One of the relics was the veil of Our Lady. One of the relics was part of the swaddling clothes of Christ. And so these relics are in this church in a golden box inside encased glass. And they're up in the front part of the church, the apse of the church. It's a very beautiful, old, ancient church, over 1,000, probably over 1,500 years old. And there we were, 5 kids, my pregnant wife. The oldest of the kids was about 6 years old. And so all the way down. And we start off our tour with a 45-minute lecture all in German. And I understand German, so I'm having the time of my life. And my wife, who catches every 10th word, is trying desperately to keep the 5 kids while she's pregnant inside this little square area where we are. And so finally that part of the tour is over, and we go into the apse of the church, which is just beautiful, all ancient things everywhere. And we have the kids, and I'm holding one of the babies, and she's holding one of the babies. And our beautiful 6-year-old daughter is dutifully listening to the beautiful tour, and Mummy's explaining things, and it's amazing things. And off to the side are choir benches. Choir benches are ancient benches where the monks used to sit. And in between, on the bench, in between each little seat is sort of a wall kind of thing, all in beautiful carved oak. And the wall was there so that they would focus on Jesus and the Blessed Sacrament, not on one another. And protecting them was this big velvet rope. And our 3-year-old, Jacob, decided that he needed a seat. So, of course, for him, he slipped under the velvet rope and sat on the first of the choir chairs. And you know how parents get back their kids when you really can't make any noise because there's a tour going on and it's in a stone church, so every sound echoes, 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 echoes. You do the look. You know the look? And you know the look that kids respond with when they're going to look at you and tell you something else? And so here's what Jacob did. He's on the choir bench and he went, ho-ho, to the next one, and to the next one, and to the next one, all the way down to the end of the church. And by that point, you're sweating. You're thinking, I can't do a thing, but this is absolutely insane. Finally, he gets to the end. He's kind of bored with the game, so he comes back. I'm saying, that's it. You guys are all staying here. There's no, you look, just. So the tour's going on, and of course I'm distracted with it because it's amazing. We're in this ancient church, and I'm watching the tour now, and in the middle of the apse of the church is this chained off area with big, fat, ancient chains, and on the floor there is a beautiful carved marble thing that says it's the tomb of Emperor Otto III. And so we're watching, and they're explaining how this beautiful mural is up there on the wall, and I hear, and I look, and there are 2 of my oldest boys swinging the chains. And there is my 2-year-old John Paul, and he is on top of the tomb of Otto III, jumping up and down. And that was it. That was it. I went and I scooped up John Paul, and I told each of the older boys, look, one my pocket, the other pocket, do not let go. And I've got one baby and John Paul. No, my wife had the other baby. So I have John Paul, and I'm holding him probably a little too tight. Now John Paul has no more use of his limbs. He can no longer run away, but he has one thing left to do. And oh my word, did he ever wah. And at this point, I was beyond sweating. I was losing it. And I turned, because they had removed the Blessed Sacrament to a side chapel, I turned to the reliquary full of the most important relics in the church, and I said, Lord, please, please help us. And I kid you not, I regard this as an absolute miracle. I turned around there in this ancient church in Germany, in the apse of the church, and I looked, and down there by my feet was an unopened pack of gummy bears. And I picked it up and I opened it up and we went, "Woo!" And for the rest of that whole beautiful journey, pilgrimage inside that church, we had silence. We had reverent silence. I should say praise the Lord, but I don't know how charismatic you guys are. But we had silence, and after the tour ended, we were both beaming with holy joy. And so I said to my wife, you know what? Can you just watch the rest of the kids? I'm going to take John Paul, the little one who was jumping up and down on the tomb of Otto III and was quiet after that, to say thank you to Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament in the Adoration Chapel. And so we got to the Adoration Chapel, and this is typical of churches which are used as almost like museums, is they have a section, a chapel, where it's big signs. You know, this is for adoration only, no visits, silence please. And so I walked right up to the front with little John Paul, only 2 years old, and walked right up to the front and knelt down at the kneeler and praised and thanked Jesus in the Eucharist for what truly to us was a miracle. It was a miracle that we were there in Germany in the first place, but it was an immediate miracle in that we had silence for the rest of our trip. And you know, as we walked out after a few minutes, I was really proud, because here's this little 2-year-old totally silent in an adoration chapel. And as we're walking out, I could see all the old ladies smiling, you know, with that admiring little smile that you love so much, me holding the baby, and, you know, yeah. And we were 3/4 of the way out of the chapel, and John Paul stopped. And you know what, when the kid stops and you're sort of, whoa, hey, what's that? And he stopped and he whisked around and he put up his hand and he said, "Goodbye, Jesus!" And out went the pride, and we were back to beautiful humility. But the beautiful thing is, my friends, you can walk and live this life of faith, fully, completely, and totally abandoning yourself to Christ. The best way through His Holy Mother. He is ever faithful and will never let you down. You will experience crosses. But in those crosses and in those persecutions that you suffer for the faith, you will never, ever be a more powerful witness to the truth of Jesus Christ. God bless you, my friends.